The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus Chen's corner office like a relentless accusation, each droplet a reminder of the tears he'd watched fall from Sarah's eyes 6 months ago. He'd built an empire worth $300 million, commanded boardrooms across 2 continents, and could negotiate deals that would make seasoned lawyers weep, yet he couldn't negotiate his way back to the woman who'd once believed in him more than he'd believed in himself. The divorce papers had been signed on a Tuesday, he remembered, because Sarah had worn the blue dress he'd bought her for their first anniversary, and he'd wondered if she'd chosen it deliberately, knowing it would break something inside him that no amount of money could repair. She'd walked away from half his fortune without a second glance, taking only her grandmother's wedding ring and the photo of their honeymoon in Santorini, the one where they'd promised each other forever while watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible shades of gold. Now, as Marcus stared at the city sprawling beneath him, he understood what his grandfather had meant when he'd said that success without someone to share it with was just an expensive way to be lonely. The old man had died clutching his grandmother's hand after 63 years of marriage, and Marcus had envied him even in death. The intercom buzzed, jolting him from his thoughts. "Mr. Chen, your car is ready for the Children's Hospital fundraiser," his assistant announced. Marcus straightened his tie, the same silver one Sarah had given him for his birthday 3 years ago. He'd told himself he wore it for luck, but deep down, he knew it was because it still smelled faintly of her perfumia jasmine and hope, a fragrance that had once filled their home and now existed only in his memories and the fabric of this tie. The Children's Hospital fundraiser was Sarah's idea, born from her volunteer work and nurtured by her endless compassion for kids who'd never had the advantages he'd taken for granted. Even after their separation, Marcus had insisted on continuing as the primary sponsor. It was his way of staying connected to the part of Sarah that had made him want to be better than he was. 20 minutes later, he stood in the hospital's atrium, surrounded by the gentle chaos of hope and healing. Doctors in scrubs hurried past, their faces etched with the peculiar combination of exhaustion and determination that came from fighting death daily. Families clustered in corners, some celebrating small victories, others comforting each other through unimaginable losses. This was Sarah's world now, a place where money mattered less than kindness, where success was measured not in quarterly profits but in saved lives and healed hearts. Marcus had just finished writing a check that would fund the new pediatric wing when he saw her. Sarah stood near the children's playroom, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. She looked exactly as she had on their wedding day, radiant, purposeful, alive with a kind of joy that couldn't be manufactured or bought. Her chestnut hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows, and she was laughing at something, her head thrown back in that uninhibited way that had first captured his heart at a coffee shop near Columbia University 15 years ago. But then Marcus's vision focused, and his breath caught in his throat like a fish hook finding its mark. In Sarah's arms was a baby. The infant couldn't have been more than 3 months old, with wisps of dark hair and tiny fists that clutched at Sarah's sweater with the desperate trust that only babies possessed. Sarah was bouncing the child gently, whispering something that made the baby gurgle with delight, and the expression on her face was one Marcus had seen before in their early days of marriage, when they talked about the children they'd have someday, the family they'd build together. The world around Marcus seemed to tilt on its axis. His hands shook as he watched Sarah kiss the baby's forehead with the tenderness she'd once reserved for their shared dreams. The conversations they'd had about starting a family echoed in his mind, how she'd wanted children right after the wedding, how he'd insisted they wait until his business was more established, how someday had become soon, and then when things settled down, until finally, it had become another casualty of his ambition. Had she moved on so completely? Had someone else given her what he'd been too focused on profit margins to provide? Marcus found himself walking toward her before his rational mind could intervene, drawn by a magnetic pull that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with the way his heart had recognized its missing piece even across a crowded room. "Sarah." She turned at the sound of his voice, and for a moment, her face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions: a surprise, pain, something that might have been longing, and finally, a careful neutrality that hurt more than anger would have. "Marcus." Her voice was softer than he remembered, mellowed by something he couldn't identify. "I didn't expect to see you here. I couldn't stop sponsoring your event," he said, his eyes inevitably drawn back to the baby in her arms. "It's important work." The silence stretched between them, filled with all the words they'd never said and all the chances they'd never taken. Finally, Marcus's carefully constructed composure cracked. "Sarah, I need to know." His voice was raw, stripped of every defense he'd built over the past 6 months. "This baby, is it yours?" Sarah's eyes widened, and then something shifted in her expression. She looked down at the infant in her arms, then back at Marcus, and he saw something there that made his chest tighten, in not anger or resentment, but a profound sadness mixed with something that might have been pity. "His name is David," she said quietly. "David Chen." The surname hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Chen, they're naming his name." "Sarah, how is that possible? We've been divorced for 6 months, and he's clearly he's not mine, Marcus." The words hung in the air between them like a prayer waiting to be answered. Marcus stared at her, confusion and hope warring in his chest. Then Hosea questioned Mark. "Do you remember your brother's wedding last year?" Sarah asked gently. How Danny looked so happy. How Lisa glowed. Danny, his younger brother, the one who'd chosen teaching over business, who'd married his college sweetheart in a simple ceremony that had brought tears to their mother's eyes. Marcus had been the best man, but he'd spent most of the reception taking business calls, missing his brother's first dance because a client in Tokyo needed to discuss quarterly projections. They're teachers, Marcus, they don't make much, but they've got more love in their little apartment than most people find in a lifetime. Sarah's voice grew softer. "When David was born with a heart defect, the medical bills started piling up. Danny was too proud to ask you for help, but you know how he is. He'd rather work 3 jobs than feel like charity." Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. "The baby Davida, he's Danny's son?" Lisa developed complications after the birth. She's been in and out of the hospital for 2 months. "I've been helping with David while Danny works and visits her." Sarah's eyes met his, and in them, Marcus saw the woman he'd fallen in love with, the one who'd volunteer at soup kitchens on Christmas morning and secretly pay overdue bills for elderly neighbors. "I couldn't stand by and watch your family struggle when I had the means to help. My family." The words felt foreign on his tongue. When had he started thinking of Danny and Lisa as separate from himself? When had blood become less important than board meetings? "Lisa's getting better," Sarah continued. "She should be home by next week. But David's going to need surgery for his heart, and the insurance, I'll take care of it." The words came out before Marcus could think, instinctive as breathing. "Whatever he needs, whatever they need, I'll handle it." Sarah studied his face for a long moment, and Marcus felt as though she were reading his soul, cataloging every regret and missed opportunity written there. "That's what I told them you'd say," she said finally. "Danny didn't want to believe it. He said you were too busy building your empire to care about anything else." The accusation hit home because it carried the weight of truth. Marcus thought about all the family dinners he'd missed, all the phone calls he'd let go to voicemail, all the moments when being present had mattered more than being profitable. "He's not wrong," Marcus admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I lost sight of what mattered. I lost you. I nearly lost them too." David made a small noise in Sarah's arms, drawing both their attention. His eyes were open now, dark and serious, like he was studying the world with the gravity of someone much older. When his gaze fixed on Marcus, something extraordinary happened. The baby smiled, and not the reflexive smile of an infant, but something that seemed deliberate, as if he recognized something in Marcus's face. "Can you?" Marcus started, then stopped, unsure if he had the right to ask. Without a word, Sarah stepped forward and carefully transferred David into Marcus's arms. The baby was lighter than expected but solid with life and possibility. As Marcus looked down at his nephew, he felt something crack open in his chest. This was what he and Sarah had talked about in those early morning conversations when the future had seemed infinite and love had felt like enough to conquer anything. "He looks like Danny did as a baby," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom showed me pictures once." Same serious expression, like he's already planning how to save the world. "Maybe he is," Sarah said softly. "Maybe that's what babies do, remind us that the world is worth saving." They stood there together, the three of them, and for a moment, Marcus could almost pretend they were the family he'd thrown away in pursuit of success that now felt hollow and meaningless. "Sarah," he said, not looking up from David's face. "I know I don't deserve to ask, but what would it take? What would it take for you to give us another chance?" He felt her go still beside him. When he finally raised his eyes to meet hers, he saw tears there, the same tears he'd been too busy to notice during their marriage, the ones that had fallen while he'd been chasing deals and building walls instead of bridges. "I don't want your money, Marcus," she said quietly. "I never did. I wanted your time. I wanted to be more important than your next acquisition. I wanted to build something together that couldn't be measured in dollars." "Then let me try," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "Let me show you that I can be the man you fell in love with, the one who used to bring you coffee in bed and listen to your dreams and believe that we could change the world together." David made a contented sound, his tiny fingers wrapping around Marcus's pinky with surprising strength. In that grip, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility and possibility, not just for this child, but for the family he'd neglected and the woman he'd lost. "It's not that simple," Sarah said, but her voice held less conviction than before. "Nothing worthwhile ever is," Marcus replied, "but there's a USA it's worth fighting for. I know I can't undo the past 6 months, or the year before that when I was too blind to see what I was losing, but I can promise you this, from now on, you and family come first. Not the business, not the deals, not the empire I thought mattered so much." Sarah was quiet for so long that Marcus began to fear he'd lost her completely, but then she reached out and touched David's hand where it still clutched Marcus's finger. "Lisa and Danny are going to need help with the medical bills," she said finally, "and someone to watch David during his recovery. Someone who understands that the most important meetings are the ones that happen at 2 a.m. when a baby needs comfort, or at dinner tables where families share their days." "I understand," Marcus said, hope blooming in his chest like spring after a brutal winter. "I want to understand." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw the exact instant when her walls began to come down. "There's a support group for families dealing with pediatric heart conditions. It meets every Thursday at 7. If you're serious about these about USA, you'll be there." "I'll be there," Marcus promised, meaning it more than any contract he'd ever signed. "And Sunday dinners at Danny and Lisa's, every week, no exceptions. No phones, no laptops, no emergencies that are more important than family." "Every Sunday," Marcus agreed. David yawned then, a tiny sound that somehow seemed to contain all the hope and possibility in the world, as Marcus looked down at his nephew Watt, this small person who had inadvertently brought him back to what mattered. He realized that the most important negotiation of his life hadn't been for a merger or acquisition. It had been for a second chance at love. 6 months later, Marcus would stand in the same hospital, holding Davida, now healthy and strong after successful surgery, while Sarah leaned against his shoulder, her engagement ring catching the light. They'd rebuilt their relationship slowly, carefully, like architects designing a foundation meant to last forever this time, but that was still in the future. For now, in this moment, there was just a man who'd lost everything that mattered, a woman who'd never stopped believing in second chances, and a baby whose innocent trust had reminded them both that some things were worth more than all the money in the world. "Take me home," Sarah said softly, and Marcus knew she wasn't talking about the penthouse apartment with its city views and empty rooms. She was talking about the place where families gathered around kitchen tables, where love was measured in moments instead of dollars, and where the most successful people were those who understood that having someone to come home to was the only empire that truly mattered. As they walked toward the hospital entrance, David sleeping peacefully in Marcus's arms, Marcus Chen realized that he'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what you really had. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very committed to change, you get the chance to build it back better than before. The rain had stopped, and sunlight was breaking through the clouds like a promise kept.